8:40 a.m. July 7, 1967. 17-year-old Nancy McQuan drove her brand-new yellow Camaro along the winding coastal highway that clawed its way through the outskirts of Brooklyn. The ocean breeze no longer felt refreshing. It was cold, damp, and carried with a sharp, metallic scent that made her stomach twist. Her window was open, but it was as if the air didn't want to come in. She forced a smile. Today was supposed to be perfect. Her first day working as a secretary at her father's office. A new chapter. A new beginning. But something was wrong. The sky over the sea was too still, painted in a pale, bruised gray. The sun tried to pierce through but failed, leaving the road cast in a dull, sterile light. The Camaro's engine hummed steadily, but each mile felt heavier than the last, as if the car were moving through something thicker than air. She hadn't seen another car in 20 minutes. Not one. The radio crackled, then went silent, then hissed softly, like someone whispering from far away. Nancy reached to turn the knob, and froze. A man was standing on the shoulder of the road just ahead, tall, motionless, facing her. She blinked. He was gone. Her breath caught in her throat. She gripped the wheel tighter, her knuckles bone white. She didn't remember passing the last turnoff, didn't remember the trees looking so dark, didn't remember that rusted road sign, twisted and unreadable. She was still heading toward Brooklyn, wasn't she? On the misty morning coastal road, the young woman's sports car rolled steadily, as if it were perfectly safe. Ray squinted through the windshield. He'd noticed the Camaro since it merged. For no particular reason, it was just something that kept him from taking his eyes off it. The car was going at the right speed. No swerving, no signs of anything out of the ordinary. But the road was strangely empty. No birdsong, no wind. Even the waves seemed muffled silent. Then, suddenly, as if pulled by an invisible hand, the Camaro veered sharply to the right. Without warning, without slowing down, the tires screeched, spun, as if screaming in protest. Ray let out a desperate scream as the Camaro tore across the road, swerving sharply into the oncoming lane, missing the front of an oncoming truck by inches. Then, bam! The Camaro slammed into an old oak tree on the side of the road, its trunk cracking, its body smashed, and a cold gray smoke began to leak from the hood like the last breath of something awakened. Ray slammed on the brakes, and his car skidded across the cold asphalt. His heart pounded in his chest as if it were about to burst. But it wasn't the impact that sent a chill down his spine. It was the way Nancy's head had turned before she hit, looking straight into the rearview mirror. Not at the road, not ahead at someone or something behind her, with an expression that wasn't fear, but recognition. A police lieutenant, Ray Donovan, drove a few cars behind the bright yellow Camaro. Lieutenant Donovan slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop with a sharp screech. He bolted out of his seat and ran toward the shattered Camaro, his heart pounding in his chest. The driver's side window was still open, the wind blowing silently through it like a cold breath from a place where no one lived. He leaned down, his face close to the glass, his eyes searching inside. Nancy McQuan sat there, pale. Not pale with fear, but strangely pale, as if the blood had long since drained from her skin. She slumped over the wheel, eyes half closed, pupils glazed over as if staring into some void beyond this space. She moaned softly, not in pain, not as a cry for help, but as an echo from the depths, as if someone were repeating an ancient sound that did not belong to her. No blood, no wound, no bruise. But something was wrong. Donovan called her name, rapping hard on the glass. No response. No blink. Just a soft moan, steady as a mantra, echoing in the slowly freezing air. And then he realized Nancy was whispering something. Her mouth moved almost imperceptibly, over and over. He leaned closer to the glass, listening. A name. A word. But not clearly. As he leaned in a little closer, Nancy's eyes snapped open completely. Black. No whites. No reflection. And she whispered, "He's behind you." Lieutenant Donovan stepped back, his sweaty hand shaking as he gripped the radio. Car 14. Need an ambulance on Coastal Route 37. Female casualty unconscious, cause unknown. Sending additional backup. Urgent. He let go of the radio. There was no other sound. No cars. No birds. No ocean waves, even though it was only a few dozen yards away. Only a low, regular clock-like groan from inside the Camaro. Donovan opened the door, the cool air seeping from the interior like a morgue. He bent down, eyes scanning every inch of the interior, looking for any clues. A routine accident. It had to be. He checked the glove compartment, empty. The glove compartment beside it also empty. No wallet. No papers. He bent down to the floor. No bottles. No broken wine glasses. No smell of alcohol. Just something very faint, like old damp ashes. Nancy still moaned. Her voice didn't change, didn't rise or fall, as if the sound came automatically from something other than a living body. Donovan leaned closer, whispered, "Nancy? Can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Her eyes were still half open, still unblinking. It wasn't that she didn't hear, it was that she didn't know how to respond. Suddenly, from deep under the passenger seat, there was a faint rattling sound, like fingernails scraping metal. Donovan started and pointed the flashlight into the darkness, empty. Then he turned back to Nancy. She was looking at him, abruptly, without warning. The eyes were now pitch black, reflecting no light, like two smoldering pits of coal. She moved her lips, barely making a sound, but Donovan read, "He's listening." The ambulance came tearing through the unusually thick fog that was covering the coastal road. Two paramedics quickly removed Nancy from the Camaro, but as soon as they touched her body, they both paused, as if they felt something clinging to her, invisible and cold. She was still alive, but her breathing was so shallow that it was hard to tell. Her skin was pale and cold like ice pulled from the bottom of the ocean. No blood, no injuries, but it felt like life was being pulled out bit by bit from within. At the hospital, the medical team acted quickly. Blood tests, clean. Body check, no bruises. Eyes, nose, ears, nerve reflexes, no response. But all vital signs began to fall freely. Adrenaline injected directly into the heart. No response. Defibrillator activated. No return of electrocardiogram. And then, in the silence between the shocks, an old doctor stood still, eyes wide. Nancy was looking at him. She was unconscious. Her heart was not beating, but her eyes were wide, and her pupils were constricted as if she were remembering, as if she saw something. Behind him, 11:30 a.m. 2 hours and 30 minutes after the accident, Nancy McQuan was pronounced dead. The doctors bowed their heads, speechless, but a young nurse standing back in the corner suddenly shook, tears streaming uncontrollably. She was smiling. She whispered, "I saw it. It was obvious. Something else was smiling through her mouth. No one answered. And then from the wall clock, the second hand stopped. Complete silence. Somewhere in the room, an unplugged medical device flickered on and off once, then went dark. Only after Nancy was dead, when the light in her eyes had completely gone out, when her body was covered with a cold sheet and dragged into the morgue, did the medical staff make the terrible discovery. A nurse was wiping her hair, preparing for an autopsy, when her hand stopped. In the middle of Nancy's silky blonde locks, on the occipital bone at the back of her head, there was a small circular spot perfect as a puncture, but deep and cold as a portal. A doctor bent down to examine it. A flashlight was shining, and his whole body went rigid. It was a bullet wound. A small, clean, round hole. No blood, no swelling. No sign of normal trauma. As if the bullet had entered in a way that did not belong to the physical world. No one understood why it had not been noticed before. No one understood why there was no blood, no tissue damage. But the X-rays later confirmed. A small metal bullet lodged directly in her brain. Nancy had not lost control of the wheel. She had not fallen asleep. She had not been drunk. She had been shot. In broad daylight, on an empty road, with no witnesses, no explosion. But the most haunting question of all, who could have shot her, without leaving a sound, a trace of blood, or a chance of survival? And why was she smiling as she died? Detective Albert Seidman, a tough guy on the NYPD, who had faced down cold-blooded mafia and ruthless serial killers, stood frozen in the McQuan living room. In front of him, Nancy's parents sat as still as stone. Her mother's eyes were dark and panicked, almost unable to cry. Her father tried to keep his composure, but his voice was hoarse. She never did anything wrong. Not a complaint, not an enemy. You understand, detective? No one wanted to kill her. That was the scary thing. Seidman left the grave, silenced house and went to the parking lot where the yellow Camaro sat quietly in the dim light. The car was clean, not a scratch on it, not a trace of blood, not a bullet hole. He examined every inch of metal with a flashlight, with his bare hands, with the intuition of a man who had come to terms with death. No bullet holes in the body, no sign of the bullet having gone through the air. He climbed into the driver's seat, reconstructing Nancy's position when she hit the tree. If the bullet wasn't outside, the question hung in his mind, a voiceless whisper. The report from the first lieutenant on the scene only added to the chill. I was only 3 cars behind her. Everything was normal. No one was near her. Then suddenly, she turned, as if pulled off the road by something invisible. No shots, no running, no shell casings, no witnesses, no sound, no logic, just a small pencil point puncture in the back of her neck, discreet, dry, cruel. Seidman backed away from the car, exhaling thin smoke in the strange July heat. Something was wrong, not human. That night he turned on the tape recorder, his voice low and trembling, a rare occurrence. The Nancy McQuan case. No suspect, no motive, no sound, no point of entry, just death. And the silence was closing in on everything like an invisible hand. Seidman dispatched teams that spread out like shadows, silently scanning every inch of coastal asphalt. They crouched at the edge of the highway, turning over every pebble, shining their flashlights into the smallest cracks in the pavement, as if the bullet might be sleeping in the salty dust of the sea breeze. But there was nothing. No shell casings, no blood, no sign of a struggle. Only the sound of cars whizzing by like knives cutting through the wind, and the air grew colder even though the sun had not yet set. By late afternoon, Seidman stood motionless on the side of the road, his hands clenched, his eyes staring blankly at the passing cars like ghosts. The frustration did not come gradually, it came as a cold shiver down the spine. How could a girl be shot in broad daylight, on a busy road, and no one heard the shot? No one saw the gunman. No one saw the flash. Only the Camaro slid out of the lane, as if yanked out of the world by an invisible hand. Someone saw. Someone had to, Seidman said to himself, but his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. All that remained were the fading shadows of the sun stretching across the road, forming the faint iron bars of an invisible prison, where the truth was locked away, silent, motionless, and malevolent. For 5 days, Seidman and his team did not sleep. Bloodshot eyes knocked on doors all over Brooklyn, asking each one, was there anything unusual that morning? An explosion? A shadow? A flash of light? But Brooklyn remained silent. The bewildered faces, the desperate shakes of heads, the clues as faint as cigarette smoke in the wind. Until July 12, the truth finally came out, in the most stifling whisper. They arrived at the gas station 2 blocks from the scene, a dusty old place where old Theodore Day stood behind the counter as usual, a close friend of Nancy's family. When asked, he sighed. I didn't see anything. I was fishing alone that day, on a boat, far away. Seidman was about to leave when he suddenly stopped. His eyes were fixed on the space behind Seidman. Around 8:40 a.m., I fired a shot into a floating beer can. A light, breezy sentence, but a chill down her spine. A single shot, a solitary pastime in the still water. The bullet did not stick in the can. It grazed the water, ricocheting like a steel blade whizzing across the bay, past the sound of the waves, through Nancy's half-open rear window, as if fate had made a way. No one heard the shot. No one saw the bullet. Just a small hole behind her left ear, no blood, no bruise, no last words. Just Nancy, collapsed before the silent void of the universe. Death came not out of hatred, not out of guilt, just sheer irony. An anonymous bullet from the hand of an acquaintance, in the middle of a peaceful morning like any other. But this time the wind blew in a different direction. Theodore collapsed into the chair in the interrogation room, his calloused hands pressed to his face, his mouth muttering like a madman. I only shot the beer can. God, I only shot the beer can. No one in the room said anything. Only the cold ticking of the wall clock like a guillotine counted down. Seidman looked at him silently. He had seen murderers before, had faced cold blood and lies. But this time, what he faced was a damned disaster, triggered by a lonely old man's most harmless pastime. The trajectory analysis left no room for doubt. The shot had ricocheted off the water, across the open space of the bay, through Nancy's lowered rear window, and gone straight into the base of her skull like an unforeseen curse. Nancy had not had a chance to hear the bullet coming. Not a scream, not a warning. A moment. From life to death. Theodore was captured. The press called him. The beer can kill her. But the jury, all things considered, declined to indict. Accident. Fate. Cruel coincidence. No matter what you call it, Nancy's death was no less horrifying. In the end, he was fined $100 for illegally discharging a firearm in the city. $100. A young life lost. A small price to pay for an eternal tragedy. Theodore never touched a gun again. He closed the gas station. No one saw him leave the house after that. Some say he sat in front of Nancy's old photo every night, not eating, not sleeping, staring at the smile that had turned to cold ash. Seidman drove by once. The house was dark, the windows covered, but he was sure in that room there was a heavy breathing like fire, and Nancy's ghost was still standing there, between two sobs, between two worlds. That morning, Nancy McQuan drove her Camaro across the bridge, the wind whipping through her hair like fingers of freedom. She didn't know, and never would, that each moment of joy was the final step toward a death written by the meaninglessness of the universe. At the same time, hundreds of yards away, a finger pressed the trigger. A bullet shot out of the barrel, guided by the trickery of physics. It hit the water like a silent clap, changed direction, and flew through space as if summoned by fate. It flew through the open window, through the light, and into Nancy's skull. No warning, no sound, no immediate pain. Just a slight movement, as if she had just listened to something far away. Then her head tilted back aimlessly. No plot, no anger, no final words. Just a bullet, wild, aimless, and yet perfectly accurate. Nancy was not killed. Nancy was touched by an unconscious trigger that the world did not realize was a verdict. No one ran. No shots were fired. Just death passing by on the wind and carrying a life that was not ready. On the evening of September 17, 2021, in a musty, run-down motel room in Euless, Texas, Jason Allen Thornburg, 42, a self-proclaimed street preacher, quietly wiped dust from a chipped wooden table. His fingers carefully arranged the Bible, candles, and other small objects, as if preparing for a sacred ritual. He had lost his home in a fire that summer. Since then, Jason had wandered between his warped faith and the demonic hauntings that crept into his mind. The small room was no longer just a place to live. It had become a private shrine to the dark whispers that echoed in his head. Tonight, he had said he would host a Bible study. But in the corner, behind a tattered curtain, the daggers, ropes, and plastic bags were arranged as carefully as if they were a sacrificial offering. Everything was clean, neat. He smiled at himself in the mirror, a hollow smile, as if the darkness within was overwhelming the last remnants of his humanity. "God has chosen me," he whispered, but there was no answer, except for the old fan, whining like the groan of a trapped soul. Jason had just bent down to retrieve some old Bibles from the rotten wooden cabinet when a soft knock sounded 3 heavy beats, like a ghost knocking on a coffin lid. He straightened, his heart beating slowly and strongly, and walked to the door. When he opened it, the pale yellow light from the motel hallway fell on the tattooed face and haggard eyes of David Luaris, a large man who reeked of smoke and defeat. Jason smiled, a strange smile. Not exactly welcoming, but full of anticipation. David, his voice hoarse, stammered, confessed, "I'm wanted. They'll kill me if they find me. I have nowhere else to go." His eyes darted back and forth, as if the darkness were chasing his every breath. Jason stared at the man before him, as if he were looking through his skin, seeing not just a drugged drifter, but a rotten, lost soul ready for salvation. "Come in," Jason said, his voice low, like an invitation from some deep well. "You were brought here for a reason." David stepped into the room, and the door closed behind him, clicking like a lock locking a fate. They sat across from each other in the cold, dim light of the room, like two figures forgotten by time. David couldn't sit still. He was hunched over, his fingers trembling and tapping irregularly against his thigh, his eyes constantly glancing toward the locked door, as if it might open at any moment, or never again. Jason, on the other hand, was unnaturally calm, his eyes deep and still like the surface of an ancient well, reflecting nothing but darkness. He didn't speak of sin, didn't speak of doctrine. Instead, he whispered words as soft as a breeze, but they seeped into David's mind like black smoke seeping into white cloth. 15 minutes passed, silent and empty. The conversations were awkward and awkward. The air in the room was thick, as if someone or something was holding their breath with them. Then Jason stood up. The lock turned, dry and silent, like the sound of a coffin lid closing. David was startled, but before he could react, Jason gently placed the Bible on the table. "Your soul must now be cleansed," he said softly. "Not a request, a judgment." David nodded slowly, as if hypnotized. He began to read, each word echoing in the sealed room like an interrogation chamber. Jason sat opposite, his hands clasped, his lips moving with each line of prayer, but his eyes remained wide open, fixed on David, as if watching over some unbroken ritual. Time passed, distorted. Outside, darkness fell. In the room there were only whispers mixed with the sound of pages turning and heavy silence. The room was no longer a place of refuge, it had become a place of waiting for something terrible. Night fell like a thick curtain, swallowing the world outside the small room. Darkness poured through the cracks of the window, quietly creeping into every corner, like a living entity listening. Jason gently closed the Bible. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if a ritual had just ended. He looked up, his empty gaze sweeping over David. "Now," he said, his voice as soft as a breath, "it is time for you to return to the world." But David did not move. His eyes were bulging, his dry, cracked lips trembling as he whispered, "Don't make me leave. Please, let me stay tonight." The plea rang out like a cry from the bottom of a well, both desperate and tinged with fate. Jason looked at him for a long time, didn't say anything, didn't nod, didn't shake, just silence, as if waiting for an invisible voice in his head to nod for him. Then he rose slowly, pulling a few old blankets from under the bed, arranging them carefully on the floor as if preparing a resting place for a corpse rather than a living person. "You will stay," he said, "but not for me, for something greater." David just nodded, his eyes empty. They sat down, reading the Bible again, but now each verse rang out not as a prayer, but as a call from the abyss, regular, haunting, inescapable. Until they were both exhausted, Jason closed his eyes. David lay down on the cold floor. Then silence fell over the room, a thick silence, not of sleep but of darkness, lurking at the edge of consciousness. A final breath, an unblinking darkness, and something was awake. For the next 5 days, room 103 was filled with an eerie silence, not peace, but the silence of places abandoned by life. No one came or went, no voices, no doors opened, no footsteps. Only one sound penetrated the thin walls, relentless, unyielding gospel music, played so loudly it was almost screaming. Songs about heaven, salvation, and the blood of Christ rang out like distorted chants, playing day and night as if to chase something away or hide it. The guests began to complain. Some knocked on the door of room 103, but no one answered. The unpleasant words were passed to the front desk. "That music isn't normal. It's like someone is punishing a soul." But the landlord just folded his arms, silently looking at the bill. Jason paid regularly, cash on time, not a cent missing. And so he did what most people do, When faced with something strange they don't understand, he ignored it. No one asked any more questions. No one looked closely. No one knocked on the door of room 103 again. Only the music echoed heavenly hymns, coming from a room that was decaying into hell. Early in the morning of September 22, the sky was gray. The pale light of dawn had not yet penetrated the rusted tin roof of the motel, when a figure stepped out of room 103 silently, without a sound. But no one could recognize him. The person was wrapped in a full-body hazmat suit, a pale white hazmat suit, silent as a ghost in the toxic smoke. His face was completely hidden behind the opaque glass, reflecting a sunless sky. In his hand he carried a large, bulky suitcase, which when dragged left a long trail on the cold, damp cement floor, as if the contents were not just luggage, but a heavy part of something that should not exist. No one saw him leave. Or maybe people saw him, but deliberately turned away. No greeting, no closing of the room door. He simply got into his car, an old sedan, and turned out of the parking lot, disappearing into the morning mist. Around 6:15 a.m., the fire alarm sounded in Fort Worth. An industrial dumpster behind an abandoned building was ablaze, the flames swirling like pent-up rage. The smell of burning flesh mingled with rubber, plastic, and something pungent, like a cremated corpse. The firefighters, seasoned by the grim scene, turned away, retreating a few steps as the flames released an incomprehensible heat, not like a trash fire, but like something being purified. A young soldier muttered, "Someone wanted this never to be found." But while the fire consumed everything, it could not burn away memories or guilt, and room 103, now completely silent, was still locked from the inside. The fire was extinguished, leaving a gray cloud of smoke that lingered like a ghost. When the lid of the dumpster was lifted, the firefighters, though seasoned with blood and fire, stepped back, their faces as pale as ghosts. One of them dropped his flashlight. Another bent over and vomited onto the charred asphalt. Inside, what remained was no longer human. Just charred bones, twisted flesh, waxy tissue, and dismembered body parts tossed like trash. The stench was sweet, familiar, and terrible. The kind of smell that only human flesh can smell when burned. No explanation was needed. The sight said it all, a real-life crematorium. The news spread like a bloody oil slick. The security cameras at the Euless Inn led straight to a cold name, Jason Allen Thornburg. The blurry image captured a hazmat-suited figure dragging a suitcase out of room 103, silent, neat, as if discarding old furniture rather than a body. The police didn't have to search long. They had 3 names. David Lueras, the last man seen entering room 103, never to return. Lauren Phillips vanished into the darkness in mid-September. Maricruz Mathis, no one heard her last scream. All were found in the same dumpster, dismembered, burned beyond recognition, not to conceal a crime, but as an offering. In the interrogation room, under the cold yellow light, Jason Thornburg showed no remorse, no trembling, no flinching. He sat straight, his voice soft as if he were reciting a sermon. He believed that God had chosen him, not to preach, but to execute, to sacrifice, to cleanse the world with blood. Thornburg confessed everything with an eerie calm. He slit each victim's throat, each stroke, ritually. Then he dismembered their bodies bone by bone, piece by piece of flesh, with a precision that should not have come from a self-taught man. Then, almost in a whisper, he said what silenced the room. "I ate the heart of one of them, because it was the strongest part. The victims' bodies were hidden under the bed in the motel room for days. Meanwhile, he continued to live, reading his Bible, playing gospel music loudly to drown out the smell of blood and decay that was slowly permeating every fiber of the room. Finally, when he heard the signs, he dragged them away in a suitcase to what he called his metal altar, an industrial dumpster in Fort Worth. Then he set them on fire. That wasn't disposal. That was last rites. December 2024. In a quiet Tarrant County courtroom, the jury took no time to reach its verdict. Jason Thornburg guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence, death. No one cried. No one prayed for him. But the chill in the room didn't come from the sentence, it came from his words. Prosecutors brought up Jason's earlier confession, not just the 3 charred bodies in a Fort Worth dumpster, and a more silent death, his roommate in 2021 who Jason claimed burned himself in the bathtub because God told him to. No one believed it anymore. And then from old Arizona police records, the name of his ex-girlfriend emerged mysteriously missing. No trace, no body. Jason had lived with her and had said she was taken away, like Abraham offered Isaac. Each murder was a slice of the twisted world Jason believed to be real, a series of rituals to open a sacred portal that only he could see. He did not flinch at the death sentence. He smiled as he left the courthouse, his eyes not on the living, but on something distant, invisible, that still whispered to him in the darkness. A preacher of light sowing the deepest darkness. Jason Thornburg, the pastor, with the still face and empty eyes, does not bring salvation, he brings death. Slow and sacred as a blood ritual. Faith is twisted into a cruel instrument. He uses the Bible not to heal, but to lull his prey, to lure them into the illusion of redemption, then tear them apart. When the last gospel music dies, the room falls into a dead silence, and 3 lives are no more. A plea for forgiveness in his hands turns into a curse. A soul longing for salvation becomes a sacrifice. Jason does not kill out of hatred. He kills because he believes God is commanding. And in that delirium, he builds an altar of human blood within 4 walls of motel lights. No more faith, only dust and ashes, and the devil in preaching clothes. Thursday evening, May 21, 2015. The opulent silence of the wealthy Hong Kong mansion was broken by a faint sound, the squeak of sneakers on polished wood floors, a stray breath in the frozen air. Lily, a bright-eyed, youthful, confident 16-year-old, pushed open the door to her family's private gym, the place she had always considered her own after dinner domain. But that day, the space was not entirely empty. Someone was there. Her father, Dr. Kao Kim Soon, a renowned anesthesiologist, was sitting on a yoga ball, his back hunched, his eyes half closed as if he had just finished a workout. His breathing was steady, but unnatural, like he was trying to imitate something alive, while inside he was empty. He had never been here at this hour. His presence was off, unnatural, cold. Lily hesitated, then asked, "What are you doing here?" Her father opened his eyes. A brief smile, very slight but lacking the familiar warmth. "The office is empty today. I'm playing tennis with some friends, just relaxing a bit. I'll be right out." He stood up and walked out of the room. His steps were steady, unhurried, but not like someone who had just left a rehearsal room. And Lily, still standing there, had no idea that she had just stumbled into a chilling moment in a play she had not written. She couldn't believe he hadn't come here to practice. He had come to wait for the right moment. Friday, May 22, 1 p.m. In the quiet, elegant dining room, the sunlight filtered through the silk curtains, like the gaze of an invisible observer. Lily sat motionless, her head bowed, her hair covering most of her face. The textbook was open before her like a mask of fatigue. She shouldn't be home at this hour, but her father had ordered it. No friends, no fun, only study. His voice, when he said it the day before, had been like a sentence. Across the dining table, her mother Wang Sufing sat silently. Her face was gentle, but her eyes held something indescribable. Worry, regret, or simply fear. And then the sound rang out again. The familiar footsteps. Slow, steady, heavy, as if each step was stepping on the heartbeat of the house. Cao Kim Sun appeared in the doorway of the dining room, calm and self-satisfied. He looked at his daughter like a pawn who had been placed in the right place. He stepped forward and placed a cold kiss on Lily's forehead, a touch that carried no love, just formality. Then he turned to kiss his wife quickly, dryly. No one said anything. No one smiled. And then he left. "I'm going to work." The door closed behind him with a heavy sound, like the fateful lock being locked. Only when he was out of sight did Wang Sufing lean slightly toward her daughter. She whispered as if she didn't want the house to hear. "Let's go. Just the two of us. A little shopping. It's fine." Lily raised her head. A moment of hesitation. Then she nodded slightly. Within minutes, mother and daughter were out of the house, hurried footsteps echoing down the hallway, laughter challenging the icy air behind them. But they didn't know as they walked out that door. A machine was set in motion. A plan, silent and ruthless, had begun its countdown. 4:15 p.m. A light breeze swept down the quiet street, where rows of trees shadowed grand mansions and locked iron gates. No dogs barked, no children, just the soft click of sneakers on the cobblestone pavement. A jogger's sweat beaded on his forehead, slowed down as he saw a yellow Mini Cooper parked off the curb. The engine was still running. The exhaust pipe was puffing out thin wisps of smoke, like the breath of a dying creature. He frowned. Something was wrong. He moved closer. He looked through the driver's side window. Two figures sat motionless in the front seat, a woman and a young girl. Necks tilted slightly, arms hanging limply, eyes half open, as if interrupted from a dream. They didn't move. They weren't breathing. They weren't alive. He tapped on the glass. Once. No response. Again. Harder. Still nothing but thick, eerie silence. The man's breathing was labored. His hands were shaking. He stepped back, pulled out his phone. "Please hurry. There's someone in the car. They're not waking up. They." 3 minutes later, the ambulance siren tore through the gloomy afternoon air. The fireman broke the lock on the car. The door opened and a thick, stifling air, with the sweet, silent smell of death, poured out. Inside were the bodies of Wang Sufing and his daughter Lily. No wounds, no blood, just absolute silence, as if they had been sitting there for hours waiting to be discovered in a sealed coffin, disguised with plastic and a running engine. They were dead, and no one heard a thing. The pale yellow Mini Cooper was parked on the side of the road, the engine still humming like the last whisper of life. The leaves on the old trees stood still, as if holding their breath. Inside the car, two motionless figures, mother and daughter, sitting upright, seatbelts still fastened, heads tilted slightly to one side as if falling asleep. Forever. No scratches, no blood, No signs of violence, just a deathly silence, spreading like ink seeping into white paper. Inside the car, a neatly folded handbag, a yoga mat, pastel-colored resistance bands, still smelling of new plastic, and in the trunk, a deflated yoga ball, crumpled. No voices, no history. The police tore through every detail like they were tearing the flesh off an anonymous corpse. Search the car. Search the house. They searched the web browsers. They wanted to understand, but were met with inhuman silence. No poison in the blood. No security cameras showing anything suspicious. No hunch. And then time began to rot the case. A week. A month. A season passed like the mist. No solution. No suspect. No motive. Only one question remained, tapping slowly in the survivors' minds. Who died so peacefully in a running car on a sunny afternoon? Then a new investigator, young, stubborn, not believing in deadlock. Reread the notes. He paused there. A yoga ball. An innocuous object. An exercise tool. An item so ordinary that no one paid any attention. But to the right person, it can be the thing that carries death in its heart, and no one hears it. Carbon monoxide. Invisible. Soundless. Tasteless. Odorless. No way out. Just fill the balloon with air. Put it in the car. Open the valve. Close the door. Then leave. No knife. No gun. No wound. Just death that comes like sleep, but never wakes up. And that balloon itself, limp, lifeless, whispers the secret. The killer doesn't need to stay. Just be prepared. The ball was inflated like any other yoga ball, but inside there was no air. It was death. Carbon monoxide. Colorless. Odorless. Tasteless. Invisible. But absolutely deadly. Dr. Kao Kim Sun, an anesthesiologist and expert in toxicology, brought it to the hospital one peaceful morning. No one noticed as he quietly filled each layer of elasticized plastic with deadly gas. No one asked why a yoga ball needed poison gas. He took it home, hidden it, waiting, like a ticking clock. No rush, no panic, just a man sitting at breakfast with his family, and knowing he was going to kill them. That afternoon, he quietly placed the ball in the back of his Mini Cooper, gently turned the release valve, then walked away. The gas crept out like a ghost, without a sound, without warning, without a trace. Lily, despite being warned, still went with her mother, out of love, because she thought everything would be okay. But no one could have expected. Mother and daughter sat in the car, laughing and talking. Then silence. Eyes closed as if sleeping, but they never woke up again. No screams, no blood, just an eerie silence, and an empty yoga ball. Kao Kim Sun was arrested. 2 lives, 2 indictments, 2 lives taken away without a scratch. In court he sat there, silent, as cold as stone. Not a tear, not a word of apology, not a glance at the coffins of his wife and children. Why? An affair? A suppressed rage? A desire for control pushed to the limit? We can guess. Hundreds of theories can be built. But he never spoke. And perhaps it was that silence that was the most terrifying thing. No confession, no remorse, only an empty gaze, as if those deaths were insignificant. But the 2 motionless bodies in the yellow car that day, they still spoke, without words, but with a silence that never ends. For the dead do not speak, but their death screams, and that echo haunts the living forever. This was no crime of rage, no knife stuck in, no blood smeared on the floor, only poison gas, a death that was odorless, colorless, and had no knocking on the door, only a yoga ball, seemingly harmless, and a plan cold as metal, tightened step by step like a machine. The man who had done it didn't scream. No mad laughter, no demonic growl. He just stood there, silent, walked out the door as if going to work like any other day. Behind him was a car that slowly turned into a discreet tomb. He didn't wear a mask, because he didn't need to. He didn't need to pretend to be a monster, because he was the embodiment of the void. No remorse, no love, no eyes that could reach where he had sunk long ago. Sometimes the scariest people don't hide in the shadows. They live in the light of day. They are husbands. They are fathers. They are doctors. And they kill with a chilling silence. Because there are demons who don't need faces. They just need a reason and a chance.